يا رسول الله والسلام عليك يا حبيب الله.
The magnificence of the saints, the awliya Allah. Allah Ta'ala states in the Holy Quran, in Surah Fatir, verse 28, only those of His devotees who possess knowledge fear Allah. Undoubtedly, Allah is honorable, forgiving. From this we learn that religious scholars, the ulama, are people of great honor and status. Allah Ta'ala has vested His awe and fear in them. Whoever would be blessed with the fear of Allah, it would be done through the means of the true and pious scholars. However, the men of knowledge are those scholars who possess knowledge of religion and whose deeds are correct. In Surah Al-Mujadala, verse 11, O believers, when it is said to you, make room in your assemblies, then make ample room. Allah will make ample room for you, and when it is said, rise up, then arise. Allah will exalt those of you who believe from among you, and those who are given knowledge in high degrees, and Allah is aware of what you do. This tells us that Islamic scholars are persons of high status, as they are held in high esteem in the world and in the hereafter. Allah Ta'ala has promised about their high status, that they have respect in the world and in the hereafter. In a hadith, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, the ulama are indeed the heirs of the prophets. From the Holy Quran and Hadith, we have seen the magnificence of the Islamic scholars. But who are the ulama? An alim is one who is very well versed in his knowledge and has achieved mystic status. He is one through whose knowledge others achieve the nearness of Allah Ta'ala. An alim is one who has achieved the nearness of Allah Ta'ala and fears Allah Ta'ala. Whoever has achieved the highest level of knowledge but has not achieved the nearness of Allah Ta'ala and does not fear Allah Ta'ala is not an alim. This is because the nearer one gets to Allah Ta'ala, the greater the fear of Allah Ta'ala becomes in him. The greater the fear, the greater will be his obedience, and he will be more submitting to the will of Allah Ta'ala. Because of his piety and purity, the worshipper achieves the nearness of Allah Ta'ala and comes in the troops of the saints, the awliya Allah, and Allah Ta'ala honors him. In Surah Yunus, verse 62, listen carefully. No doubt there is no fear nor grief upon the friends of Allah. The pious servants of Allah Ta'ala, the saints and friends of Allah Ta'ala, do neither fear nor grief. In this verse of the Holy Quran, Allah Ta'ala used the word ala before stating the magnificence of the awliya Allah. Be fearsome of the friends of Allah. When Allah Ta'ala commanded to pray namaz, to observe fast, perform hajj, pay zakat in the Holy Quran, Allah Ta'ala did not use the word Allah before mentioning the obligatory deeds. But when Allah Ta'ala mentioned the awliya Allah in the Holy Quran, Allah Ta'ala warned to be fearsome. Awliya Allah is being mentioned. It is known to Allah Ta'ala that in His creation there would be worshippers who believe in the worship of Allah Ta'ala but would refuse to submit to Allah Ta'ala. There would be people who would believe in the will of Allah Ta'ala but refuse to believe in the awliya Allah, friends of Allah, who have submitted to the will of Allah. Allah Ta'ala has warned beforehand not to reject the awliya Allah. They do not fear nor grieve. An example of fear and grief would be where a wealthy person fears that his wealth will be stolen. If it is stolen, then he grieves. The friends of Allah are that do not fear or grieve. They submit everything, including their lives, to the will of Allah Ta'ala. Such conditions of the saints is mentioned in the Holy Quran. In Surah Al-An'am, verse 162, please declare, surely my prayer and my sacrifice and my living and my dying are all for Allah, who is the Lord of all the worlds. The awliya Allah lives in the service of religion and remembrance of Allah Ta'ala and dies serving Allah Ta'ala. In Surah Al-Mu'min, verse 44, you shall soon remember when the time comes as to what I say to you, and I entrust my affairs to Allah. Allah sees all His devotees. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 207, and among the people is he who sells his life in seeking the pleasure of Allah, and Allah is compassionate to his bondsmen. The awliya achieve the nearness of Allah Ta'ala and are attributed the guardianship of faith, wilayat. They fear Allah Ta'ala to such a great degree that they do not fear anything else. They are free of any worldly fear or grief. They leave everything, including their lives, in the care of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. One meaning of a wali is a helper. Allah Ta'ala states in the Holy Quran in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 02, and help each other in righteousness and piety, and help not one another in sin and transgression, and remain fearing Allah. Surely the punishment of Allah is severe. Another meaning of wali is graciousness, or karimi. The awliya Allah is a congregation who have achieved the nearness of Allah Ta'ala. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, verily Allah Ta'ala has said, whoever shows enmity to a friend, a wali of mine, then I have declared war against him. And my servant does not draw near to me with anything more loved to me than the religious duties I have obligated upon him. And my servant continues to draw near to me with nafil deeds until I love him. When I love him, I am his hearing with which he hears, I am his sight with which he sees, and his hand with which he strikes, and his foot with which he walks. Were he to ask me of something, I would surely give it to him. And were he to seek refuge in me, I would surely grant him refuge. This is in Sahih Bukhari. Because of the nafil deeds, the worshipper is drawn close to Allah Ta'ala, that Allah Ta'ala becomes his hearing with which he hears, and Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala becomes his sight with which he sees, and his hand with which he strikes, and his foot with which he walks. Allah Ta'ala gives him what he asks for and gives refuge if he seeks refuge. Allah Ta'ala states in the Holy Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 194, and fear Allah, and know that Allah is with the God-fearing. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is with those who fear Allah Ta'ala. The magnificence of the saints, the awliya Allah, is like a water drop. When the water droplet is dropped in the sea, it loses its status as a drop of water and becomes the sea. Such are the wali of Allah Ta'ala. To achieve this level of nearness to Allah Ta'ala, one should associate with the awliya Allah, attend their gatherings, to come under the guardianship of faith. Give your hand in the hand of a perfect saint, a Pir Kamil.